What it is, what it was, what it shall be. Back again, Spiritwar Bootcamp number 116. This video is entitled Biofield Data Storage. So how's everyone doing? This is a continuation of our previous video. Last video we were talking about infoplastics, which is the use of information to encode physical matter. And I gave the analogy of printing a cylinder seal. Now, to continue, I want to go on and talk about the book of Genesis and various other texts and how they describe the creation of the earth as very similar to this infoplastic process, usually through the medium of speech. You know, abracadabra, I create as I speak. In all the days of creation, when Yahweh or whoever is going through, the Elohim are going through, right? What do? 7 times they make an utterance, right? Dabar in Hebrew. So this is to make an utterance. And dabar, you know, that's where the last syllable of abracadabra comes from, those last 2 syllables. Speech, the act of speech. So what is speech? It's a vibratory transmission of information. In order to receive the non-vibratory nature, like the interpretive nature of the information, you have to have a decryption matrix, which we would call language, right? But even that, unless it's standardized, language is useless, because people could use the same word to mean different things, and that would make all communication incomprehensible in any kind of absolute sense. And so that's why language is important to understand. So language, not only in the sense of human languages, but like a computer language, right? It's a syntactic cipher code that you can use to input and extract information. And anyone who has the cipher can decrypt the code, right? So in this instance, what you have, so in the book of Genesis, for instance, it talks about the signs of the heavens and signs of the earth. So in Hebrew language, the word for signs, which would refer to like a mark or an imprint, almost like a tattoo, right? The word for that is aleph tav, or ot. Sometimes I hear it pronounced ot, I don't really know. But it's the first and last letter of the alphabet. So it's telling you right there in a symbolic way, it's telling you this is about the word, right? This is about language and encryption. So, and this is not unique to that mythology either. There's lots of different myths that have a similar description. A lot of attention in the Hindu cosmology is paid to sound as well. And so, and for instance, one of the first things that Adam does? He goes around naming the animals, right? So you can see this linguistic encryption matrix comes back into view over and over again. Same thing in the New Testament, book of John, chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, right? Which is a whole different cipher, because that's all in Greek, right? It's in Greek language. So there's a whole different encryption matrix. So whereas the Hebrew is a base 9 alphanumeric, the Greek is a base 8, which gets into interesting stuff. And that's one reason why Jesus, as in Jesus Christos, which is the Greek name, right? That totals, Jesus is 888. So that's showing you the 3 rows of 8 characters that comprise the common Hebrew alphabet. But in fact, they do actually have a base 9 cipher as well. But those letters are rarely used. And mostly it's only used in this kind of encryption code context, right? So again, why are all these ancient people obsessed, and why do they closely associate that creative process with a type of encryption and a type of vibration and sound that's shaping reality? Why did they say that? Is that a metaphor, or is that literal, or is it both? Right? So now, this is talking about the last week's topic of infoplastic, right? So now how does this pertain to today's topic, which, as I said, is biofield data storage? Well, my argument since the very first video that I started to make is that energy is more primary than the physical matter, and that our physical body, which we identify with so dearly, right, it's a vibrational construct. And you know, just like we have something called blood plasma, it's just like this massless amorphous substance that's shaped and held in position by a vibrational code, right? And a syntactic code. Like some people think of the DNA as that, as your genetic code, right? So that's one way of thinking about it. But there's a very interesting researcher, I believe his name is Luc Montagnier, French DNA researcher, And he was showing that, bizarrely, if you were to place a DNA sample inside a liquid, like a glass of water or a jar, or like a test tube, for instance, and they were doing, I think they were doing optical testing, so they were like passing light through the DNA to see it, you know, the diffraction, and see if that gave meaningful information. And so what happened was they found that the pattern persisted even after all the genetic material was removed. In essence, the water was encrypting this, how I guess you would call it, like optical code information, right? Scattering and so on, like that. So very interesting. So at least on the fringes of what we're calling material science, there's people that are getting into these kind of ideas that there's something vibrational involved with our DNA and what we're calling a code. And at the same time, these kinds of theories are being developed. We have the theories of metagenetics and epigenetics, which is the idea that our genes change the way that they're expressed, right? They can flip certain code processes on and off so that we don't have continual same genetics throughout our life. And for instance, like being exposed to different environmental conditions can turn different genetic patterns on and off, right? And that's the whole basis of epigenetics. But then we have something called optogenetics, right? Which is another sort of confirmation of this principle that I'm trying to talk about. I have the field patterns, right? The vibrational patterns behind matter. So in optogenetics, basically you bombard a human with light frequencies, and that can affect their gene expression, right? And in a way, you could think of that as like physically changing their physical structure, right? So now let's go back and let's connect what we were saying in the previous video. We were talking about the creation act, right? And how in a lot of modern interpretations and readings of these Sumerian texts are talking about some type of genetic modification. And that would be fairly consistent with what we see in other myths around the world. So I don't necessarily dispute that. But what I'm saying is, you know, there's an agenda. Basically, you have your narrative, which is a literal translation of events that, let's say, happened in some distant human past. And then you have the meta-narrative, which tells you how to interpret those events. And in this instance, what we're being given as a meta-narrative and interpretation is that there's a graduated hierarchy of biological specimens, you know, between the humans and the livestock and the Anunnaki and all these different life forms, and the Igigi and there's all these, the Watchers, right? There's a hierarchical structure in which various different organisms form like a metastructure, what we would call civilization or society, right? So these Camino encoders, right? These genetic engineers come from up in the sky somewhere, according to this story, and they have particular objectives. I don't like, many people have pointed out that Sitchin's a complete fraud, and I've seen him doing Masonic handshakes with Jordan Maxwell and stuff like that. So he's got an agenda. Anyone that's out there in such a prominent way and who's hobnobbing with, you know, George Lucas and all these types of people, right? I like Jordan Maxwell. He's super entertaining, and he has a lot of highly relevant information. He did a service, but I don't see him as a disinterested observer. I see him, and you know, maybe the fact is he would want to tell the truth or something like that, but he knows there's certain taboos that he can't really transgress and remain functional and alive and stuff like that. So maybe there's some kind of I don't know. I'm not here to judge that guy on a moral basis, but well, let's just put it this way. Who's telling us the story of ancient Sumeria? Are they telling it as is, or is there an interpretive matrix, right? For me, I am very interested in these. I've always been super into languages and ancient history, and my understanding of the state of Assyriology or whatever, Sumerology, is that much like hieroglyphics, there's a lot of subtlety, and I don't assume in any way that the code has been cracked as far as what these stories are telling. And in fact, I would place about a 90% certainty that there's multiple layers of encryption, because this is how all the other scriptures that we have obey, that kind of thing. And even normal everyday newspaper headlines, like there's multi-layers, right? There's one message that's a transmission code for the economic elites, right? And they use a lot of number codes in the news. A lot of people have been highlighting that more and more lately. So they have a whole different code system that's there, and I think the same is there. So on one level, if for the plebes, like when you're sitting around the fire telling little Bobby Joe and Billy Sue about the Sumerian or about God and how humans came into existence, like there's this whole story that casts humanity in an inferior slave context. Like, I'm not going to go into, I could give many hour lectures about how degrading all the religions are and how they're all basically slave propaganda at the behest of the priestly caste of this tiny fraction of human literacy, right, that can read and write and have all these multi encryption systems and give one version of the Tard story to the poors, right? You tell them, oh yeah, you guys are poor for a reason. You have, you know, what do they call it? Original sin. So you're created out of sin, you're inherently corrupt, and you're just lucky that we have these pedo priests here to like explain shit to you because you can't read Latin and Greek and stuff like that. You know, so you can see how there's a narrative, there's a clear agenda and there's a narrative. And if you have a priestly elite class that's communicating with each other in a language that you don't speak, and they're telling you a story, there's a 99% chance that story and the meta-narrative surrounding it is not for your benefit, okay? But that being said, what I'm showing here in this video is there is high-level meta-scientific information, okay? There's scientific information in these scriptures, as many scholars have noted and tried to tell people about. There's very advanced science, metaphysics, and cosmology in these stories, but it's not at the surface level, okay? You have to see it the way that these priests and scribes see it. You have to know their code systems and what they're telling each other versus what they're telling top down to the masses, right? But again, and so now coming back to our original topic, biofield data storage. So our biofield is a just like this code that we're reading in the scriptures, this is a multi-layered encryption. So for instance, when I say biofield, a lot of people might not know what that is. So it's a magnetic, thermal, optical, electrostatic field that surrounds all biological organisms. The go-to example that everyone always gives is Kirlian photography, which is the idea that if you place biological samples on a highly charged electrical plate, it's going to show you these coronal arc discharges, which is telling you something about the way that energy moves through that biological specimen. And it's highly structured and it's highly ordered. And another thing that they've demonstrated with that is that, like, say you have an amputated tissue, like you cut a piece of a leaf off or you cut off a frog leg, and you place the biological specimen that's been amputated in this electrical field, and it still will show you the holographic, like, after image of the energy field of the amputated body part. And a lot of people associate this with phantom pain, right? Like how people can, if they have certain limbs amputated or get removed in a trauma way, like, you know, they basically still can feel pain within that limb, and that's potentially a function of this non-material energy substrate. That's the blueprint. And likewise, like a lot of life forms, salamanders, even I've heard this about humans, sometimes humans will grow back a body part that they lose, right, if it happens during certain phases of their life cycle. And I've also heard that you can facilitate this process with electrical microcurrents, for instance. So what we're seeing again and again from all these different angles is that there's electromagnetic substrate beneath the physical substrate of our body, okay? So that gets us into the biofield. So like I said, our blood's a ferrofluid, right? All our nerves and our sensory afferent and efferent neurons are electrostatic mechanism that's pumping these microcurrents back and forth, right? And then our blood's a ferrofluid, so it's pumping and circulating, and every time it's pumping, it's generating a electromagnetic field, as all flowing magnetic dipoles will always do, right? So we know that, and it's a composite field. And so then you take into effects like how our body works with light and photons, and how, like, melanin, for instance, can convert photons into electricity, and how it's particularly, like, a lot of our biological structures are particularly tuned to receive the light spectrum as it comes from our sun and from a natural lighting source, right? So there's all kinds of biology involved in all that. So we know this is the case, and it can be demonstrated, and there's all kinds of predictive value to these types of theories, right? So now how does data storage come into the picture? Well, Most of the forms of data storage that we have now are electromagnetic, like even tape, like reel-to-reel tape, 8-track tape, cassette tape, all these different VHS videotape. All that is a form of magnetic storage that's based on creating, you know, these magnetic alignments to store binary type code information. And similar thing with like CDs and laser discs and what do we call CD-ROMs. They don't even use that anymore. But even SSDs and like hard drives and these different, they use a very similar type of binary encryption principle that's based on altering the energetic imprint. And in a way, you could think of it almost like a wave-like pattern. I know CDs are like that, so they'll have a divot that kind of is the mathematical code for an on switch or an off switch. It's like this little divot. It almost looks like a trough and crest of a wave. And you know, same as with these magnetic dipole moments that they have in other forms of magnetic tape, right? So the same, it's logical to extrapolate that there's something similar in our biological function, right? So we know now, only within the past couple decades, they know about biophotonic communications, optical signaling within our biological systems in the body. So we know for sure that the body communicates with light, and then it transfers data and information back and forth between various cells and organs in our body based on biophotonics, as well as electromagnetism. So again, the confirmation for this type of model is not lacking. And we know that our cells store information and they have memory, like DNA being only one type of example of sort of the hardware that our body uses to store data and information. But a lot of people talk about neuronal wirings and stuff like that. And a lot of people now are starting to talk more about these more OR theories, right, and the microtubules and the different types of photonics and quantum superposition type signaling systems that can exist in our cells, as well as a medium for consciousness and data retrieval, data storage, right? So now, how does this link? Now, what's the link between what we're doing in our previous video and what we're doing now? So the idea is that there's a creation script, if you will. That all that we see around us, heaven and earth, and all the planets and everything is generated through a vibrational code, if you will, through a blueprint. That's one good way of thinking it. And so when we look around us at the solar cycle, lunar cycle, the seasons of the year, again and again, we're seeing this kind of cybernetic oscillation, right? A rise and fall, up and down, hot and cold, day and night, etc., right? So it's clear that we live in an algorithmic reality, basically. That's one way of thinking about it. And that there is a code to creation. We know that. We've identified many, many aspects of this type of code. But I think what's deliberately being written out of the story and what's passes for religion nowadays, which is basically tard training and like slave conditioning programming, right? But if you take the time and make the effort to read into these deeper, more scriptural, like priestly layers of the code, right, there's a lot more information in there about how to create using sound and vibration. And just the same way that it says in the Bible that the heavens imprint on the earth almost like a seal imprinting on a wax, you know, or, you know, showing this code and showing this little signature mark, you know, that's reality operates in much the same way, as above, so below. So in other words, there's a celestial code at the max scale, right, where everything's really broad, really expanded time cycles and scale, physical scale, right? And then we have the micro scale, same. So these codes exist at all levels. And the general Neoplatonic view, and a lot of the view that we see in these religions, is that things pass downwards. Things manifest into reality from the most refined or the most celestial scale. They pass down into increasing materialization and eventually into death. A lot of people talk about the underworld as this death realm. I don't particularly see it that way, and I don't think the geography and, you know, all the geological sciences don't really, I mean, yeah, the idea that there's an underground subterranean world of chambers where something really hot could be happening, right? That part could be pretty real. And this is what we see in the Norse cosmology with Muspelheim, right? We have Muspelheim, and then we have Niflheim, This is another thing. I remember I mentioned this way long ago, but I'm going to re-emphasize this again. So we were talking in some recent videos about the concepts of the Nephilim and these non-corporeal intelligences, right? So why is it that all the way in the Norse lands, you know, we have the same exact name, the Niflheim, and just like we have the word Nephele in Greek, which means a cloud, Niflheim is called the home of the mists. Right? The misty cloud beings live in Niflheim. In Muspelheim, you have like lava beings, right? More or less. And that's what we would, and even Muspelheim contains the word Helheim, right? So it's got hell right in there. It's the fiery hell. There's also like a cold hell as well. So anyway, even Dante has that in there. But so the point is to say this code, someone picked up on this code a long, long time ago. And they put it into all kinds of stories for human edification. And most of what contained in those stories now has been so distorted and so dumbed down. And the only way that we're being given and allowed to interpret it is this slave meta-narrative that's trying to cast us in the role of human gold miners or whatever, these money-grubbing little Gringotts, gnomes that are like fighting over rocks that come from underground and stuff like that, you know. But that's not the only way that the story can play out. Like personally, me, I'm one of these Niflheim types, right? Because my ancestors were called the McGees, right, which means people of the mist, and before that they were called the McGregors, which means the Watchers. So, you know, there's other types of mythic roles that humans have played throughout time. And so what's the deal with these Niflheim, right? These cloud beings and these mist beings? Well, they don't physically die. So if you think about it, most of our behavior is all geared around what we want to keep and what we want to hold on to and what we identify with ourselves with, right? So this is where we get the whole thing of identity politics and all the religious wars and all the race wars and everything that's going on in the world is based on people who identify with the meat suit, if you will, right? Instead of identifying with what I'm talking about here, which is biofield data storage, right? And if you identify with the meat suit, that's like instead of placing value on a hamburger, right, you're placing value on the poop. Like that's the end. The meat suit, as we call it, is the end result of a long manifestation process. And if you cut off the connection between this higher energetic realm, the meat suit falls dead in one instant. A blink of an eye. If you cut off our energy supply, the body is a worthless piece of luggage. It's not. It's a liability, right? It's not an asset at that moment, right? But in the moments in where we exist in a connection with this higher domain of energy, information, and so on, that gives us the ability to be creator gods, right? To be craftsmen, to build great sailing vessels and great palaces of stone or whatever it is. Like all that ability that all our pleasures and enjoyments come from is derived on the non-material domains, on the information domain. So let's take, for example, a wealthy person, right? Who, we'll just say an electrician, because that's what came to mind for me. Say an electrician, they're a journeyman electrician or a master electrician, right? They could go around and get paid $100 an hour and drive time and everything else. They got a lot of flow of money coming in. What's the source of that flow? Well, it's energy and information encryption. They have skills, they have memory, they have lived experience, right? So their information field, like their biofield data storage, you know, is trained in a certain way. They've been imprinted with this certain type of knowledge. And based on that knowledge, all their skills and all their wealth and abundance is deriving from what's been encrypted into their biofield, right? And so this is what I think people need to start focusing on. And you can encrypt your biofield. It's like creating an avatar on a video game or something like that. You can sculpt it however you want. And the best way to sculpt it is by understanding the underlying mechanisms of reality creation, of matter. How does matter work? How do our biological organs work? How do our exceptional abilities function? Because there is a hardware and a software. So the hardware in this case would be our physical bodies, our brains, and our biofield. The software is what is stored on that. And so this is why with the Spirit War series, what I'm trying to get people to understand is that the greatest power on this earth comes from people who know what I'm describing to you now. And they control reality at that level. They imprint it at will. they're idealists, right? But they try to make everyone else into materialists. So that's why we have big data. That's why big oil has given way to big data now, and all the biggest companies that are pump and dumping the entire S&P 500, like X.AI or whatever, SpaceX and all these, it's all data based, right? It's all information based. What's the second thing they want to always have and control over? Media, right? The bewitching sorceress that turns, you know, strong men and warriors into pigs and retards by meta programming their biofield, right? And telling them that the way to happiness and success is to watch the Super Bowl, buy lots of McDonald's, drink Coca-Cola and Pepsi, get obese, take some GLP toxins, you know, take some whatever it is, blood thinners, brain eating drugs, all these different things that people are taking, calcify every, you know, calcium oxalate stones in your kidneys and your gallbladder, and because they calcified all the water and all the food supply. And see, because you don't have this knowledge and you're not placing value onto your biofield, now your biofield is being poisoned so that it can be hacked and remoted, right? So now that you're just a hackable wearable for the information economy, right? But you don't have to be that. That's what I'm saying. The first step to getting out of that is putting yourself at cause for all these things. So programming your own biofield, programming your own environment, understanding the dynamics of energy and information, how putting bad information into our psyche through our senses, through our visual cortex, through our sound, through our music, through our codes, through our meta-narratives and mythic stories and TV sitcoms, all that is a form of information programming, and it's changing the physicality of your body. It's changing how you see the world. It's changing the mythic meta-narrative that tells you your identity, who you are, what you could possibly achieve. All that's being programmed into people. And so look at what I'm saying. The proof of what I'm saying is that the people that are doing this to you are so good at what they're doing that they get you to pay to enslave and degrade yourself. Not only are you being enslaved, degraded, demoralized, brainwashed, hypnotized, but you're paying for it. So you're going out to the job, or you're going to the bank, or you're getting interest on your whatever assets, you know, and you're giving all your assets and all the worth that you've generated through your intelligence and through your physical actions in this life. You're giving all the worth of that away in exchange to be programmed, brainwashed, talked down to, you know, lied to about your own history, lied to you about your government, lied to you about everything. And for the privilege of getting all that, you're paying for it through the nose, day and night. People value that more than anything else. You know what I mean? This is the reality. And so my attempt to get people to become more divine, to become more excellent as human beings, to realize the true innate potential of the human biological organism, and more importantly, the coherent actions of a collective body of human consciousness combined and cooperation with all the living things around us, and the ecosystem, the birds and the bees and the plants and animals and all the minerals under the soil. Like, we could actually synchronize with that through the biofield, and we can gain intelligence with all these different types of life forms, and we can learn how to cooperate with them. We could live in a blissful golden age agrarian utopia. There's no reason, I mean, that's how humanity is meant to exist. That's all the soul system is actually designed to support that. But yet, through meta-programming, through having our biofield be hacked and imprinted with a pernicious malware viral code of self-destruction, hatred, violence, racial genocide, everything, all the above. So it's time to reboot the program. It's time to delete all the apps off our desktop, right, and our home screen. We're going to delete all the pernicious adware and bloatware and malware and spyware. We're just going to delete all that. We're going to reformat our whole operating system. We're going to reboot it. We're going to have a whole different operating system. We're going to have it completely mesh networked out, so we're not using the cell networks, and we're not using nothing like that. So the thing is, just all these devices that we have are nothing but externalizations of the innate human capacity for, you know, sympathy, empathy, telepathy, group consciousness, hive mind in the most positive context. Like, we have all that capacity, and all the myths and legends of our world, if they could be read in their true form, like, we'll show and teach exactly how this is accomplished and what the benefits of it are. right? But instead we're given this like warlike murder, you know, rage, like delusional materialism. So just look at that contrast, you know what I mean? Look at that contrast and decide which programming system you're going to really want in life. And so this has been number 116 Spirit War Boot Camp, talking about biofield data storage. And this is just one long continual process, and we'll be back next time for more. See you then.